Tonight, a major escalation in the Middle East. Hezbollah launches an attack on Israel. Hello, I'm Jano Gibson. This is ABC News. Also tonight, back to the negotiating table for Tasmania's Premier. New deals likely after the implosion of the Jackie Lambie network. A landslide victory for the country Liberal Party in the Northern Territory. And a week-long test flight turns into an 8-month odyssey for 2 astronauts. We begin tonight with a major escalation in the conflict between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. Just before dawn local time, around 100 Israeli fighter jets carried out a series of airstrikes across southern Lebanon in what the military claims was a pre-emptive strike. In response, Hezbollah fired hundreds of rockets towards Israel in what it says is stage 1 of a major retaliative operation after the killing of its commander, Fuad Sukkar. Middle East correspondent Alison Horn reports.
Wow.
Rocket fire dots the night sky on Israel's border with Lebanon. The distant boom of missiles heralding a new and incredibly dangerous moment in the Middle East. Israel says it had launched missile and airstrikes as a preemptive measure over what it says was a looming Hezbollah attack.
A short while ago, the IDF identified Hezbollah terrorist organization preparing to fire missiles, rockets towards Israeli territory.
Hezbollah says it's fired hundreds of rockets in retaliation to the killing of a senior commander last week.
In a self-defense act to remove these threats, the IDF is striking terror targets in Lebanon from which Hezbollah was planning to launch their attacks on Israeli civilians.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a meeting early on Sunday with members of his cabinet. Israel is now in a 2-day state of emergency. Hezbollah is a formidable foe with more than 150,000 rockets in its arsenal. The militia is backed by Iran. All eyes will now be on what Tehran decides to do next.
And Middle East correspondent Alison Horn says people in Jerusalem are scared.
Well, there's certainly a heightened sense of fear throughout this region as people wait to see how the situation evolves. Officials in Israel have imposed further security measures throughout central and northern Israel, including restrictions on the number of people who are allowed to publicly gather and privately gather together. Schools, universities and workplaces have also been asked to close unless they have access to an immediate bomb shelter. The Israeli military too says it's increasing its readiness around the north. It is still currently striking into areas in southern Lebanon. It is unlikely this Hezbollah attack will be the trigger for an Israeli ground invasion into southern Lebanon, but both Hezbollah and Israel have warned that all possibilities are now in play.
And the attacks have sparked concerns of a broader regional conflict, and countries around the world are watching nervously. Foreign Minister Penny Wong has urged all involved to exercise restraint and de-escalate the situation. The ABC's Global Affairs editor John Lyons looks at the risks from here.
Iran now holds the key to what happens in the Middle East. The biggest question right now is, what will Tehran do? Hezbollah says it's fired hundreds of rockets in response to the Israeli attack. That's a fraction of its capability. Hezbollah is backed by Iran and it won't engage in a full-blown war with Israel without Tehran's support. Even by itself, the militant group is a far more formidable threat to Israel than Hamas. Hezbollah has as many as 150,000 missiles in its arsenal in southern Lebanon. That's more than enough to overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome missile defence system. So if Iran does decide that now is the moment to attack Israel, it would give the order for Hezbollah to unleash vast numbers of those long-range rockets. The eyes of the world will now be on Iran. How it responds in coming days will determine whether there'll be a regional war.
German authorities have arrested a 26-year-old Syrian man over yesterday's fatal stabbings at a festival in the city of Solingen. The so-called Islamic State group earlier claimed it was behind the attack, which killed 3 festival goers and wounded 8 more. German officials said a terrorist motive could not be excluded and, after a tip-off, raided a refugee hostel. The stabbing attack has reignited the debate on national security in Germany, and the government has called for unity.
We won't be divided in times like these, but we stand together and will not allow such a terrible attack to divide our society.
In France, authorities have arrested a suspect they believe is behind an arson attack on a synagogue in the south of the country. Police allege he deliberately set fire to 2 entrance doors of the synagogue, then set alight 2 cars parked outside. One of the cars exploded, injuring a policeman. President Macron condemned the attack as a terrorist act. A day after the Jackie Lambie network kicked 2 of its Tasmanian MPs out of the party, attention is turning to what happens next. The Premier still needs their votes to hold on to power, so it's back to the negotiating table to ensure continued stability for Jeremy Rockliff's minority government.
5 months is a long time in Tasmanian politics.
As I said, we're all new to this. So, you know, it would be naive of us to try and come in and go, oh, we want this and that.
The Jackie Lambie network agreed to hold the government together in minority, trading away some of their voting rights. But that was then, this is now. 2 of the 3 kicked out of the JLN to sit as independents, now working on new deals with the government.
I know the Premier's reached out to them and we'll be working through with them.
The remaining JLN MP, Andrew Jano, also wants a fresh start. The ABC understands the network now considers the old deal void and he'll be seeking a new one.
We know that there are really good people on the crossbench who want to work productively in the best interests of the Tasmanian community.
So what might these deals look like? Independents David O'Byrne and Christy Johnston retained their voting rights while providing the government with confidence and supply.
It means that there'll be more moving parts for the government. The government will need to negotiate with more people to get things through. There is now a non-Greens crossbench of 6. They need any 4 of those to pass things.
The government went to the election because it was tired of dealing with 2 rogue independents, but now it has no other option than to deal with an increasingly independently minded crossbench. And while the 2 new independents wouldn't speak today, they've all committed to providing stability.
No one wants an early election, including me. I don't want us to go back to an election. Tasmanians are always right, and they've given us this parliament to try and work as best as possible.
Parliament returns on the 10th of September with yet another change to the balance of power. Adam Holmes, ABC News.
TasNetworks says it's invoked powers to temporarily suspend industrial action being taken by Tasmania's electrical union. But the union says its strike action has not been suspended. Over the past week, members of the union have been refusing to turn the power back on during outages as they push for a 35% pay rise. This afternoon, TasNetworks declared an event in relation to forecast bad weather. CEO Sean McGoldrick says the declaration automatically suspends industrial action and returns TasNetworks employees to normal rostered and emergency duties. But Chris Clark from the union says strike action isn't suspended. He says if a major incident occurs, members will mobilise, but power will only be restored at facilities like hospitals and nursing homes. The federal government's defending moves to rein in NDIS spending by billions of dollars, saying the debate has been hijacked by misinformation. Legislation passed by Parliament aims to curb spending on the scheme by $14 billion over 4 years. It sets up new powers to investigate fraud and more closely defines what can be funded under the scheme. The Greens and some disability advocates have criticised the changes, saying they amount to cuts. But NDIS Minister Bill Shorten says the scheme will continue to grow.
I listen to the people who say do nothing, change is too hard. These people are dangerous because if we don't do something about the cost growth, there will be no NDIS.
A horrific scene unfolded in Sydney this morning after a man allegedly went on a stabbing spree on a busy road. It's alleged he attacked his partner while driving before crashing his car and attacking others, including a police officer. Dozens of terrified bystanders watched on while others bravely stepped in and tried to help.
The shocking aftermath of a chaotic crash. The 58-year-old suspect runs from a police taser while slashing himself with a box cutter before being pinned to the ground and arrested. 5 minutes earlier, the man had been allegedly stabbing his partner while driving erratically along Old Bush Road, then T-boned another car on the Princes Highway.
We heard a big bang and then came out to arguing and then realised that he had a blade.
Bystanders who ran to help were confronted with horrific scenes.
Not thinking about it, I started running across the road and not thinking about my own well-being. I was more worried about the lady on the ground and the other guy near the door to get him away from her.
Another man was slashed in the stomach while protecting the woman. He was taken to hospital in a serious but stable condition.
They've obviously gone to render assistance to both people, and then they were faced with a male armed with a box cutter. Quite frightening, but very, very brave on those people's behalf.
We just did what we thought was, right at the time.
Multiple witnesses say the alleged attacker was shouting about conspiracy theories.
He was just yelling like freedom, you all need to open your eyes, and then he'd swear.
This is where police eventually managed to subdue the man and arrest him. But witnesses have described how when he was first hit with the taser, it barely even seemed to affect the man and he was able to keep running. Looking down here, you can get a sense of how far he was able to run, even while injured, from the scene of the crash.
Police say the suspect is known to them and they are treating it as a domestic violence incident.
They were in a domestic relationship. Again, there's no history that we're aware of. There's no apprehended violence orders between the two, but we're definitely domestic related.
The man's partner was taken to hospital in a critical condition. A police officer helping in the arrest was allegedly slashed on the wrist and 2 other people were injured in the crash itself. The Princes Highway was closed in both directions for hours as police tried to piece together what led to this terrifying crime. Sarah Geraghty, ABC News, Sydney.
After 8 years in the political wilderness, the Country Liberal Party has been delivered to government with a resounding landslide victory in the Northern Territory election. The ABC has predicted the CLP will win 15 seats of 25 in the NT Parliament, with Labor decimated to just a handful, including the loss of its former Chief Minister, Eva Lawler.
A historic embrace and a moment of change as the Country Liberal Party ushers in a new era of Territory politics.
Tonight's result is a victory for hope and opportunity.
Born and bred Territorian and former lawyer Leah Finocchiaro will become the Country Liberal Party's first ever female Chief Minister. As of this afternoon, the CLP was predicted to win 16 seats in NT Parliament after running hard on a platform of stamping out crime and helping pull the Territory out of its $11 billion financial hole.
It's an honour and a privilege. We've heard loud and clear that Territorians want change and the work starts tomorrow to deliver that.
The night saw huge swings against Labor, with the party that ruled for 8 years wiped out, losing key members of its former cabinet, including Chief Minister Eva Lawler, who spoke to party faithful in a sombre concession.
I know Territorians want a change. We've heard that loudly and clearly.
Labor didn't just lose votes to the CLP. The party punished for its handling of environmental issues, with big swings to independents and the Greens.
It shows that when you provide a positive alternative, people will change their vote.
Coalition senators sounding the results as a warning for the Albanese government.
Now that the Northern Territory is delivered a Country Liberal Party government, I think the coalition, we can be quite confident in going toward the next federal election.
In terms of what were the key issues in the Northern Territory election, it really is around law and order, very much Territory-based issues.
A new leader voted in to try and deliver change to fix some of Australia's toughest challenges. Matt Garrick, ABC News, Darwin.
NASA has confirmed 2 of its astronauts stuck on the International Space Station since June will have to stay there for another 6 months. NASA made the decision because of safety concerns over Boeing's troubled Starliner craft. It's turning what should have been a week-long test flight into an 8-month odyssey.
What started as one giant leap towards commercial spaceflight has turned into one small step in getting 2 astronauts safely home. After intense deliberation, NASA finally revealed its decision at a sombre press conference.
NASA has decided that Butch and Sonny will return with Crew 9 next February.
Astronauts Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams now have to wait for Boeing rival SpaceX's next taxi flight. That's in February 2025 to get back to Earth. This will make what was supposed to be a journey of just 8 days to the International Space Station into one of 8 months.
When the going gets tough, and it often does, the tough get going.
The decision comes after repeated issues with Boeing's troubled new flight capsule called the Starliner. Thruster failures and helium leaks on the way to the ISS, leading to the decision.
The bottom line relative to bringing Starliner back is there was just too much uncertainty in the prediction of the thrusters.
The decision is a blow to Boeing's prestige. The company has been investing heavily in its Starliner system.
Our core value is safety, and it is our North Star.
And followed shortly behind by...
Both astronauts are experienced former US Navy captains with a background in long-duration spaceflight.
The spacecraft will bring us home, no problem.
That training will be tested as they chalk up their long-duration space habitation. Henry Swartz, ABC News.
A new report reveals the number of drug overdose deaths every year has almost doubled in 2 decades. The latest figures show more than 2,300 people died in a single year.
Jen Furby lost her 25-year-old daughter Nicole to overdose in May 2022.
Often I'll have a moment of realisation that I'm never going to see her, and I just cannot believe it.
Nicole died with 4 different drugs in her system. A report from the Pennington Institute found 73% of unintentional overdose deaths involved 2 or more drug types. Opioids turned up in 80% of those deaths, followed by benzodiazepines, antidepressants, stimulants and alcohol. Heroin is driving the increase in opioids, and experts are also worried about the increasing risk of powerful synthetic opioids such as fentanyl and nitazenes.
The problem is that they're appearing in counterfeit pharmaceuticals, but they're also appearing in cocaine and in heroin.
The data shows deaths involving stimulants are also increasing.
In relation to Indigenous Australians, we've got a huge overdose problem, about 4 times worse than the general population in Australia.
Pennington Institute Chief Executive John Ryan is calling for a national overdose prevention strategy. He says less than 2% of the drug budget goes to harm reduction, while 2/3 goes to law enforcement.
Even though we know that we can't arrest our way out of these problems.
The Federal Health Minister Mark Butler has labelled the report findings as concerning, and in a statement said the government is actively monitoring the emergence of nitazenes alongside continued reforms and investments in drug treatments. Nicole was Jen's only child. Her grief will be with her forever.
She was my best friend, and I'm pretty darn sure if she was sitting here with us today, she'd say the same about me.
She wants people who use drugs to be part of the conversation about how to save lives. Rachel Carbonell, ABC News.
Each year, tens of thousands of people in Japan suffer so-called lonely deaths, where their bodies aren't found for weeks, months and sometimes years. Many are elderly, cut off from their community without family or friends.
This is grim work, but someone's got to do it. Takuya Shiota has come to clean up a lifetime of possessions after the elderly resident in this apartment died. With no friends or family, the occupant was undiscovered for 3 weeks until her rent went unpaid.
The deceased passed away here, and the smell was quite strong because of the fluids that came out of her body. So we cut out all here and disinfected it.
Japan's suffering from a lonely deaths crisis. For the first time, the government has crunched the numbers. It's now expected some 68,000 people will die alone this year and left undiscovered for a prolonged period.
It's increasing considerably. We do roughly more than 100 cases a year.
Japan is getting older. Its population shrinking. Once bustling suburbs and villages are emptying and elderly people are left vulnerable. It was 20 years ago when Dr. Osamu Yamanaka opened a clinic in one of Yokohama's poorest suburbs. Back then, 4 people a day were dying at home alone, many undiscovered for long periods.
Some were skeletal if no one found them. I was young, and I thought it was unforgivable.
Dr. Yamanaka pioneered home care.
There aren't many people who are willing to deal with people from the lowest strata of society, but he is willing to come to me. I appreciate it.
If I wasn't doing it, there would be an awful lot of lonely deaths.
Services like this are now much more common across Japan, but there will always be limitations. Dr. Yamanaka says communities need to fill the gap.
If they do not socialise with their neighbours, they will end up with a solitary death. It's very difficult to prevent it.
It's a challenge Yoshiko Sato has accepted. At her massive apartment complex on Tokyo's outskirts, there are almost 400 elderly residents living alone. Today, she's visiting one of them. Yoshiko Sato set up a Zero Lonely Deaths program 2 decades ago.
Every year, 4 or 5 people died alone. It was like that constantly.
It established a network of volunteers that check up on local residents, leading to a remarkable improvement in the quality of life.
She usually visits me about once a week. I look forward to cooking with the vegetables she brings me. It's what makes my life worth living.
Yoshiko's mission of Zero Lonely Deaths was soon achieved.
After 5 years, the number of lonely deaths became 0 for the first time.
But she worries about the future. A future where people are becoming more withdrawn from their community.
A community must be built by everyone, but that's not possible in Japan at the moment. People are becoming selfish.
If everyone was more considerate of the people around them or looked after them, there would definitely be no more lonely deaths.
This is a crisis that's only going to get worse. Japan has the world's oldest society with 1 in 10 people aged over 80. And as the country continues to grow old, there's increasing pressure on the government to do more to care for the vulnerable in life and in death. For those on the front line, government support for community groups is a priority.
There is data that loneliness is the biggest factor in shortening life expectancy. In Japan, there's a lack of community ties. I feel it's very common.
A need to keep connections until the inevitable end. James Oaten, ABC News, Tokyo.
Major e-scooter operator Beam is under fire after allegations it's been deliberately exceeding its vehicle cap and potentially depriving local governments of revenue. Several local councils around the country, as well as the ACT government, are investigating the claims. It's been reported the company was not paying required registration fees on every vehicle it was operating across multiple cities. Beam has apologised but emphatically rejects any suggestion it was running a scheme to deliberately deprive councils of revenue. To sport now, and while the Western Bulldogs are September bound, Carlton's final hopes are now out of their hands after a heartbreaking 2-point loss in the final minute against St Kilda at the Docklands. The Blues now face a nervous wait tonight for the result of the Fremantle and Port Adelaide game currently underway in Perth. The Western Bulldogs got the job done against GWS in Ballarat, a 37-point victory assuring them of a finals berth.
With their season on the line, the Blues were on the board in the first 30 seconds, but the Saints had brought their A-game. In the second term, one of the ugliest incidents of the season.
Oh no!
Umpire Stephen Paperno subbed out of the game with a head injury after he was struck by a water bottle. The AFL working to identify the culprit. The Saints continued to make the most of their last outing of the season.
Oh, the Saints fans love every second of it!
But Orazio Fantasia's brilliance kept Carlton's spark alive, and the margin was cut to 9 points at the last change. After trailing for most of the game, the Blues finally got themselves in front.
Fantasia to Motlop! Jesse Motlop!
The tension was palpable as the Saints continued to push forward, and with one last roll of the dice, the Docklands erupted with a Jack Higgins special.
It's a goal! Higgins has kicked the goal! Siren!
Carlton's finals hopes hanging by a thread and now out of their hands. Before the bounce, the conditions threatened to derail the Dogs' September plans.
All the years we've been playing down here, this is probably as windy as it's been.
The Giants won the toss, but were kept to just 3 first-quarter goals, kicking with the breeze.
He gets that to move!
After the change of ends, it was the Bulldogs' turn to make the most of the advantage.
I can smell blood here, the Dogs.
5 straight goals helping them to a 17-point margin at half-time. As the Clouds moved in, the midfield got a move on.
Marcus Bontempelli!
And the Giants were kept at bay for most of the third quarter. It was a race against time to beat the weather.
I think I just saw lightning.
And the Dogs won out.
Liberatore against the grain.
A 4-goal run in the final quarter sealing the win and the Bulldogs' place in the finals. Erin Marsico-Vetere, ABC News.
South Korean golfer Ji-Yae Shin will take a one-shot lead into the final round of the Women's British Open at St Andrews in Scotland. 36-year-old Shin moved to the top of the leaderboard with a 5-under par 67. The two-time champion is 1 stroke ahead of American Lilia Vu. Overnight leader Nelly Korda hit her tee shot out of bounds on the 16th hole and is 2 shots behind Shin. West Australian cyclist Ben O'Connor continues to lead the Vuelta a España, but his advantage was cut by Slovenia's Primož Roglic on stage 8. The 3-time champion Roglic attacked on the climb to the finish at Cazorla and picked up a time bonus by claiming his second stage win of the Tour. O'Connor lost pace in the last 2 kilometres and crossed the line in 17th. And the Paralympic flame has begun its journey to Paris. The flame was lit in the English village of Stoke Mandeville, considered the birthplace of the Paralympics. It will travel via the English Channel to France, where over 1,000 forerunners will bring it to towns across the country. The Paralympic Games begin on Thursday morning, with the opening ceremony followed by 11 days of competition. To the weather now, and Kate McCready sent in tonight's photo of a rainbow over Middleton in the state's southeast. After a foggy start, particularly across the north coast, isolated thunderstorms moved through parts of the north, showers elsewhere. It reached 20 degrees on King Island today, 20 the top in Hobart as well, Launceston 18. Yesterday and overnight, the highest rainfall was 27 millimetres at Mount Reid. Strawn had 8 mils, Hobart 5. The national satellite sequence shows cloud about Victoria, South Australia and Tasmania associated with a cold front containing embedded thunderstorms. Tomorrow's synoptic chart shows a strengthening west to northwesterly airstream moving over the south of the country. Across Australia tomorrow, Melbourne a possible shower, Sydney sunny, Brisbane mostly sunny, Perth a possible shower. For Tasmania, showers easing and contracting to the north and west during the day. Showers in Strawn and Queenstown, a shower or 2 in Burnie, possible shower in Devonport and Launceston. Showers and windy in Ouse, partly cloudy across the east coast. Hobart also partly cloudy with a medium chance of showers. Sunrise is at 6:45. On coastal waters, west to northwesterly winds 20 to 30 knots, reaching up to 35 knots in the far south and east of Flinders Island. There's a gale warning for east of Flinders Island, south-east coast and south-west coast. There's a strong wind warning for the Channel, Southwest Lakes, far north-west coast, central north coast, Banks Strait and Franklin Sound, upper east coast, lower east coast and central west coast. Tuesday, showers more likely about the north and west, becoming rain and extending statewide late. More showers on Wednesday, widespread in the west and falling as snow to 700 metres, possible small hail about western and central parts. And the wet weather is set to continue in Hobart and Launceston. That's the news for now. Enjoy your evening. Good night.